Hello, my name is Joe Callahan. I work for a company called the Leading Edge Group, and we're working very closely with Bord na Móna in the creation of this video. The purpose of this video is to help you understand why Bord na Móna has started this lean journey and what role you're going to play in it and how you're going to help secure the future of Bord na Móna. The training video is organised into 3 sections. The first section is very introductory to set a context for what's involved. Then we dig into continuous improvement and lean a little bit more, and we wrap up the training video with a content on some of the tools involved. So a very important word in our understanding of continuous improvement is asking this word why. Because we're creatures of information gathering, we ask, well, why is this important? Why do we need to reduce cost? And the answer, of course, why cost needs to be reduced is because it has become imperative that you and your colleagues in Bord na Móna bog operations investigate the way in which you work with a view to reducing the costs. And the way you're going to do that is by looking at those things that are incurring wasteful activities, and we'll talk more about that later on in this training program, to help you identify those so that you can work on eliminating them. So I'd like to explain a little bit more what the consequence of this subsidy removal actually means for your company. So once that subsidy is being reduced, what it means, the ultimate amount of money that your business gets in has been reduced. This is putting pressure on the cost of your operation. So it's really important that together we look at how those costs are made up and what the elements of it are. And as can be seen in the slide or the image associated with this video, you can see here that as you look at those costs, you will find there are activities and things that take up resources and money that are wasteful, and we need tools and an approach to help us identify and help reduce and maybe even eliminate some of those wasteful activities. So in this part of the training, I'd like to move on and explain in a bit more detail what continuous improvement and what lean is about. For our inspiration, we look towards Toyota. And Toyota in the 1940s was a struggling company. It was based in Japan, as you know, making cars, and they were really up against it. They were only marginally profitable, and for them to sustain, they had to develop a whole methodology, and they brought us lean. And today we know lean as a methodology which can really help companies with their competitiveness. So when you practice lean, you ultimately practice 5 principles. The first of those principles is called value. It's to do with what the customers are willing to pay for. When customers give you their money, they expect value for it. So it's that we're seeking to try and focus on in our work. The second of those principles is called value stream. Value stream is a kind of complicated term, I guess, but all it means looking at each step of our process or each step of our workflow with a view to making sure that it adds value as much as possible. The next of those principles is continuous flow. And what we're looking to do here is to try and have the work move smoothly and flow all of the times without having backlogs or delays on its way toward the customer. The next principle is called pull, and it's where we want to be responsive to the customer. In effect, we want the customer to reach in and pull what they need from us. The final concept is called perfection, and it is where we strive for perfection. We are indeed forever trying to get to this ideal of perfection. So it means that we're continuously improving. Okay, I'd now like to dig in a little bit more into this concept of value, and in particular to focus on what is not value. And to help us in our journey towards identifying those things that are wasteful, I'd like to introduce you to a handy 8-item list that we identify as the 8 wastes. These are as follows. It starts off with transport. Then it moves to inventory, then it moves to motion waste, then it talks about waiting wastes, overproduction, overprocessing, defects, and skills underuse. And collectively we have a shorthand for remembering all those called Tim Woods. So what I would like to do now is to go through each one of those 8 activities that we recognize are wasteful, and to make sure that each of us are well able to recognize it, understand it, and find it in our place of work. I would now like to dig into the Tim Woods wastes in a little bit more detail. The first one of those is T for transport waste, or perhaps more effectively, unnecessary transport activities within your business. Examples that you might be familiar with are, for example, unnecessary journeys with the to and from the Haku pile. That would be an example from your own business. So perhaps at this stage you could stop the video and discuss between yourselves some examples from your own experience. So at this stage, I guess you'll have discussed and covered other additional examples of unnecessary transport that take place in your business, and that which could be tackled perhaps as part of a continuous improvement exercise arising from this very training. Examples that I've come across myself in my own experience are, for example, unnecessary journeys to and from suppliers where a part wasn't delivered in time. You've got to go and collect it, or make multiple journeys to collect something perhaps from an office. Okay, the next of those Tim Woods waste is, of course, the I for inventory, or perhaps more appropriately named excessive inventory, where you're some way having too much stock on hand, and this is maybe cluttering up your storage area, etc. An example from your own company would be the Haku pile, which I understand at one stage had upwards of 2 years worth of peat stock in it, which by any measure you'd have to agree is perhaps unnecessary and non-value adding. So at this stage, I'd like you to pause the training video and discuss between yourselves examples of unnecessary inventory that you have come across or have noticed in your time in the company. So I guess you've discussed between yourselves at this stage, and you'll have come up with some examples. Some examples that might have been, for example, where you have an excessive inventory of spare parts for some of the equipment. Or perhaps if you were in an office environment, you have an excessive quantity of stationery, perhaps half a year's worth of paper, for example, might not be necessary. So I'd like now to move on to the third of the wastes in Tim Woods, which of course is motion, or unnecessary motion. If, for example, when you start in the morning on a vehicle and you've forgotten the keys of it, for example, you've got to go back to the area where the keys are held, that journey to and from the office to retrieve the keys is an unnecessary journey. That's an example of a motion waste. So I'd like you to pause the training video at this stage and discuss between yourselves some examples that you can come up with from your own experience. So I guess at this stage you've covered some examples. Some other examples might be in terms of motion waste. It might be, for example, making unnecessary journeys for items in work. Perhaps an example from your line of work might be where a harvester has broken down. It is no longer available to do work, and of course there are people waiting then for it to be repaired, and that's a cost to the business. And we want to try and find instances of that and minimize those so that we can be more productive at work. So perhaps you could pause the training video at this stage and discuss between yourselves examples from your own experience for where this might have occurred. So I guess you've discussed between yourselves examples, and examples that I've come across from a waiting point of view are, for example, waiting for instructions. If a supervisor or team lead hasn't given you clear instructions, you might have to wait until they give you clear instructions. Another example might be where you're waiting for a customer to confirm delivery requirements. You're forced to wait and operate perhaps unproductively during that time. Those might be other examples. So I'd like to move on to the next waste, which is overproduction. You produce more than the company requires. All right, more than what the customer looks for, and that has to be stored. When you overproduce, you incur unnecessary handling. You incur unnecessary storage. So it's something to be tackled and reduced as much as possible. So at this stage, I'd like you to pause the training video and discuss between yourselves examples of where overproduction waste has taken place. So I guess at this stage you've covered some examples. Some additional examples that I'm sure might have come up in conversation are, for example, where if you were working in an office environment and you were preparing handouts for 4 people in a meeting and you produced 10. So clearly there were 6 over and above what is really needed. That would be an example of overproduction. So I'd like to move on to overprocessing waste. So overprocessing waste is where in some way you make the job harder for yourself. You somehow make it more difficult for yourself to get the job done. And I think this is best explained with a little story that I have about my 18-year-old son. My 18-year-old son was complaining to me last year about the weight of his school bag. And as happens when I'm ever confronted with a problem, we investigate. We say, well, why is that? So we looked through his school bag and we found that there was multiple books there that weren't on the curriculum for that year. They were unnecessary. And we also found some mouldy sandwiches, which we were able to remove. Having taken out those items from the school bag, the bag was now much lighter and much easier for him to carry. Now you might say, well, that was obvious, that was easy to do it. But he hadn't thought of it. It was only when he applied this questioning of, well, why is this happening, and investigated, did we unearth why it was happening and able to do something to reduce that particular overprocessing waste. So at this stage in the training video, I would like you to pause the video and discuss between yourselves examples of where you have found overprocessing waste in your experience. So I guess at this stage you'll have discussed some examples that you have seen from an overprocessing waste point of view. An example that I'm sure you'll have spotted is, for example, where you waited too long to achieve a moisture level that was lower than what the customer was really willing to accept. So you had, in effect, dried it too much, had taken longer to dry it to get it to the customer. So defects is the next of the wastes, and this is where we incur defects or cause rework or repair to be required as part of our work. An example from your company's point of view is, for example, if peat is stored in an area where it is ultimately washed away. It's destroyed, it's of no further use. That's a defect. So at this stage, I'd like you to pause the video at this point in time and discuss between yourselves examples that you've come across of defects. So I guess at this stage you'll have covered examples from your point of view. Other examples are where, if, for example, there was coolant required in a machine and it was the wrong type of coolant that was put into a machine. All right, the final element of Tim Woods is skills underuse. This is where a person's talent or ability is underutilized within the company. Examples within Bord na Móna bog operations are where there are people working, colleagues of yours, that are here with 40 years. This is a tremendous wealth of capability and experience, and it's really important that that talent and experience is used to help drive improvement in the company. So at this stage in the video, I'd like you to pause the video at this point in time and discuss between yourselves examples of skills underuse within your company. So at this stage, I guess you've discussed some examples of this. Another example might have been in an office environment where you have somebody that's a graphic artist, for example, but is working as an administrator, and now that this skill has been unearthed, perhaps it's an opportunity to help use them to help with a company newsletter, for example, or perhaps a lean update newsletter that will be shared with the entire company. So that brings us to the end of the section where we've introduced Tim Woods, the 8 wastes for you. And I would challenge each one of you to go and apply this in what we refer to as a waste walk. When you are walking about your place of work, please be vigilant for opportunities to locate one of these wastes in your place of work. If you find some of those, please write it on a piece of paper and share it with your supervisor. And your supervisor will be able to discuss with you if indeed it is something that can be tackled and addressed as part of this continuous improvement drive that we've been talking about. Okay, so in terms of putting all of this together, Board Nimona has a very appropriate structure shown here in the video, which is in the shape of a pyramid. And the pyramid can be described as follows. At the base of the pyramid are things that are referred to as just do-its, or often shortened to JDIs. And those are for improvement projects that can be very easily done. They don't require a large team typically, nor do they require a large time frame in which to get the improvements done. The next type of improvement are ones that are referred to as PDCAs, or more correctly described as Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's a structure, a framework to get the project done. And the person leading the project will explain more about what each of those are about, but suffice it to say that it's just a very useful framework to get the work done. In a project that's a little bit more complicated, typically will take a bit longer, have more elements to it, etc. The final framework available is a thing called DMAIC, and that stands for Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve and Control. And again, the person leading that improvement will take you through and explain what exactly those steps are. Those steps are associated with more sophisticated, more complicated, longer duration projects that will typically require more people and just take longer. So in this section of the video, I'd like to introduce you to the lean tools. And there are going to be 3 lean tools that we're going to focus on. And the first one of those is something called 5S, which you would use to help improve the workplace organization, try and decrease clutter and help eliminate waste in how your work area is organized. The next of the tools that we're going to go through are called the 5 Whys. And this is a diagnostic approach, a way of investigating wastes and issues within the business with a view to unearthing what the root of the problem is and driving improvement. And the final tool that we're going to work on is called mistake proofing. And mistake proofing is an approach of organize your work in such a way that mistakes or defects are eliminated. You just can't make them. And I'm now going to go on and explain each of those tools in turn. The first of these tools is something referred to as 5S. It's called 5S because there are 5 steps associated with it, and amazingly, each of them begin with the letter S. Hence, it's called the 5 S's. The first of those S's is the word sort. The next is the word straighten, or sometimes called set in order. The next step is called shine. The next one is called standardize, and the last of the 5 S's is called sustain. So I'd like you to explain to you in a little bit more detail what each of those are now about. So sort is what you would do if you were tidying up your home. If you were going into your home, you had a room that was full of clutter, you would go through it and you would decide what am I going to keep and what am I going to throw away. And that's called sort. What you're left with in the room are the things you really want to keep, and you'd want to straighten those out, set them in order, have some way of organising it in such a way as to make sure that there was a clear logic to where you're storing them, that it was easy for you to find them, and more importantly, easy for you to put them back in the rightful place. The next step is shine, and this is where you want to make sure that everything that you're holding on to is in perfect working order. It's really in a state of readiness, ready for use. There's no items that are broken or not ready for use in the field or in the office. The next step, the 4th S, is called standardize. And this is where you want to make sure that you adopt standard ways of working throughout your business for the tools and equipment and processes and procedures that you have. And the final S is called sustain. And this is where you want to make sure you keep practicing the other 4 S's for the rest of your career. It never stops. That's what sustain is all about. Okay, so I'd like to go through and explain what 5S can actually tackle. So it specifically, 5S improves the following. It improves your delivery time, the consistency and the time within which you can respond to your customers. You're no longer looking for information and tools and equipment to get the job done, so you can deliver more consistently. The quality of the work that's done can be improved because now you have all of the things that you need to do the job. There is no improvising because you have the right tools, they're in the right place, and the equipment is in the right place. Finally, the productivity is very much improved because you have everything where it needs to be. There's no impact to it in terms of not having the right things in the right place, no waste of time looking for information, etc. And the very last thing is safety. By making sure there's no tools or equipment or spare parts in the wrong place, you're not suffering trip hazards or dangers that might otherwise arise in the work environment. All right, so at this stage in the training video, we have a little fun exercise to really bring home to you the effectiveness of 5S. So in a moment, up on screen will appear an image with lots of circles, colored circles, and I'm going to give you 6 seconds with which to count the number of circles, or colored balls there, and I want you in 6 seconds to determine how many different colors there are and how many of each color there are. So your 6 seconds starts now. So I guess that was the shortest 6 seconds you've ever had, and it demonstrates to you the importance of actually being organized. The image that you will now see in a moment has exactly the same number of balls and colors as appeared in the first one, but now we have applied the first couple of steps in 5S. We've applied a sort, set in order, straighten, and shine. And you can see how it now appears. So if you now take a further 6 seconds to look at the next image, it becomes very evident what the correct answer is. So well done. I guess you've all successfully deduced that there are 3 different colours, and of each of the colours there are 9 balls in all. And this brings very much to the forefront what 5S is about. By being organised, tasks like that very simple little task here become even easier, and the scope for mistakes and wastes are very much reduced. All right, I'd like to move on and share with you a little example of 5S in actual practice. The example we're going to show in a moment is an office-based example. So in a moment, we're going to show you an office that it's not my office, I should admit, but it's an office that I'm sure if somebody here were seeing their own office, they wouldn't be very proud of it. But unfortunately, lots of people have offices just like this one. So as you can see from the image, which will appear momentarily, it's an extraordinarily cluttered area. By asking someone to find a document in this area, they're going to find it very difficult to locate it and get it. All right, it's going to be hard for anybody to use this office productively. Having applied 5S in the area, particularly the first and second and third S's of sort, straighten and shine to an area, you end up with an improved office environment as is shown in this image that now appears on the screen. You can see working in this office is likely to be much more productive. It's going to be easier for the people that work in an office area like this to find what it is that they are looking for. It's going to be easy to know where to put back a stapler, for example. If you borrow a stapler from a person sitting at this desk, it's going to be easier for you to put it back where it ought to be. So the next tool I want to cover is called the 5 whys. It's called the 5 whys because it involves asking why on 5 separate occasions, or perhaps up to 5. Sometimes you might solve it sooner, so we say up to 5 times, and it's called the 5 whys. If any of you have children of your own or have relations that are children or friends with children, you'll know that particularly small children are absolutely brilliant at asking why. They would drive you crazy asking why. And as professionals now, we want you to practice this in work, because when you ask why, you're investigating what's going on. You'll notice it's not called who. Who is a blame-oriented word, and you are finger pointing, and we want to try and avoid that because we want the data and the facts of the matter and not necessarily point the finger at others. So once you've asked why several times, you often get to the root cause of a problem, and once you've found the root cause, you can implement what we call countermeasures or fixes or potential solutions to those, and you solve the problem once and for all. So there was an issue in the business where the ridger was breaking down frequently. It was a big concern and an investigation needed to be done. So the first question they rightly asked was, why is the ridger breaking down so much? And an investigation revealed that there were bearings within the machine that were seizing up. They weren't working. So that had to be investigated. So they said, why are the bearings seizing? And it turned out, after investigation, that the lubricant inside those bearings had gone solid. That was great because now they knew why it wasn't working, but now they needed to investigate further. So they asked, well, why has the lubricant in the bearings turned solid? And that had to be investigated. And it turned out, after investigation, that the peat dust had snuck into the bearing, had mixed with the lubricant within it, and had turned it into soap. So that was the answer to that particular why, but that didn't ultimately solve the problem, so they had to ask why another time. So they said, why does the peat dust mix with the lubricant? Well, that had to be investigated, and that eventually turned out that the answer to that was the bearing design was not dust-proof. There was opportunities in the bearing design for dust to sneak in into the heart of the bearing. And then the next obvious follow-on why was, why is the bearing not dust-proof? And the design of the bearing requires access for lubrication. So there has to be access. So people agonized over, well, what can we do about this? Until some smart person came up with a solution and said, why don't we use a bushing instead of a bearing? A bushing, as you all know, doesn't require lubrication. All right, so that completely solved the problem and is now widely in use. So that completes the investigation. So as a result of doing those 5 whys, people were very clear as to the origin or the root cause of the problem. So there had to be another brainstorming session where the people that worked in the area came together to say, well, what can we do about it now that we know the source of the problem? And lots of ideas were kicked around, and one of those ideas that came out was, let's avoid using a bearing entirely. And they came up with a solution of using a bushing. And a bushing has the characteristic that there is no lubricant required within it, so it completely avoids the problem. So you can see that was a very good solution to this particular investigation using the 5 whys. All right, so the next tool that I'd like to go through is mistake proofing. Mistake proofing is an approach to make the work in such a way that you eliminate mistakes happening. You make it impossible for those mistakes to happen. An everyday example that I often use around mistake proofing is a 3-pin plug. It's impossible to insert a 3-pin plug into a socket the wrong way. You just can't do it. It is impossible. So you avoid the prospect of it ever happening. An example within your own place of work is on the harvesters. They were breaking down, and people studied where they were breaking down and have strengthened, provided mechanical strengthening in those parts of the machines that were liable to breaking down. Okay, so continuing on mistake proofing, I'd like to go through a particular example that you'll all be familiar with as well. When you go to a garage to fill up your car with fuel, the following image that appears here will remind you what that looks like. So if you drive, for example, a petrol car, uses petrol fuel in the car, and you go to the garage, but you're a bit distracted, and you pull up the diesel nozzle, and you want to put diesel in your petrol car, you're having a bad day, you're just not thinking straight, the nozzle just doesn't fit. Well, that's an example of mistake proofing. You just not allowed to put the diesel nozzle into the petrol car. That's at the heart of an example of mistake proofing. There are some other examples that will be shown now from within your business that really bring home this point as well of mistake proofing in practice. So some other examples from within your own business are shown on screen here now. You see up here the quick tooling change mechanism on screen here. The next image shown up here is a repeatable process to make sure critical dimensions are maintained. And the final image is one of fixture dowels. So the generic learning from all of these is to try and avoid going by eye for adjustments. If you're fitting a tool or making adjustments, don't wing it. Don't go just, it'll be all right, I feel it's right. Have a scale, have a measurement, have location holes to support it, or dowels to make sure that the tooling is in exactly the right place, that it's not just improvised, that you have a repeatable process. So you'll be very relieved to learn that you're almost finished this video. And I'd like to summarize what it is that we have covered. So fundamentally, we've done three things. The first thing we did was I introduced myself. I told you I was from a company called the Leading Edge Group, and my name was Joe O'Callaghan. And I then went on and I described why Bord na Móna is doing this drive of continuous improvement. The challenge that presents for your business is that now, in order for you to maintain your profitability, you have to find wastes within your business. And then I talked about what this might mean for you. I talked about the opportunities of you practicing a new set of tools, a way of your voice being heard in terms of ideas you might have for driving improvements. We then moved on to digging into continuous improvement a little bit more, and we learned that continuous improvement, as we're practicing in Bord na Móna, had its origins with Toyota. And Toyota had a very hard time in the late 1940s as they were trying to compete internationally, and they developed a whole set of approaches that we're going to benefit from in Bord na Móna. And that's based on 5 principles, and those principles were value, which has to do with what the customer really wants. We talked about value stream, which is a series of steps in the workflow or the work processes to make sure that they're adding value. We talked about flow, which means that the work is always moving toward the customer. We talked about pull, where we're responsive to the customer. And finally, we talked about perfection. Perfection, of course, is the goal that we aspire to get to. We know we're never going to get there anytime soon, but we're going to be forever continuously trying to get there. Hence, continuous improvement. And we worked on and we introduced ourselves to Mr. Tim Woods. Mr. Tim Woods is Mr. Waste, and we learned about transport and inventory and motion. And then we moved on to waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, defects, and skills underuse. And finally, we introduced you to the framework that Bord na Móna will use to help organize its improvement efforts. And that pyramid, if you remember, had at the lowest part of the pyramid had things called just do it's. Straightforward improvement projects that each one of you are probably capable of doing on your own with very little help and support from others. Then we talked about an intermediate category of improvements that are a bit more complicated, often require maybe a bit more people and a bit more support, and we call those Plan, Do, Check, Acts, or PDCAs for short. And finally, the really more complicated projects that will be done in a framework called DMAICs, or Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, and Controls. And the final piece of what we covered were the lean tools, and we covered 3 of those lean tools. We talked first about 5S. At 5S, we learned was an approach to help organize your work environment for maximum efficiency and productivity. And we learned that 5S was about sort, straighten, or sit in order, sometimes it's called, shine, standardize, and sustain. It's a way of making sure that your work environment is really well organized to drive the business forward. We then moved on to 5 whys. And 5 whys we learned was a way of investigating problems, trying to get to the heart of why we have the problems that we have. And once we get to the heart of it, we are in a much better position to fix those problems once and for all. And finally, we wrapped up with mistake proofing. Mistake proofing is an approach to organize your work to make sure that mistakes or problems or defects are impossible to make. And we talked about the example, for example, of a 3-pin plug. You just can't do it the wrong way. You might ask yourself, why am I doing the work that I do? Why this task? Well, that's a very important point. It is really important that the work and tasks that you do, that you're clear on what those serve to achieve. Are they adding value for the customer? Or is there an element of waste associated with it? And only you can answer that. It's important that you're questioning why at all times. So I'd like to move on to address the point of what's in it for you. This is a new initiative by the business, and it will mean some changes. So it's important to recognize what those might mean for you. So the first thing is that there's a new set of tools and techniques and indeed language associated with the practice of lean and continuous improvement, and this training will give you that new language. So you will be able to participate, and your ideas and insights are very much valued as part of this journey. It's really important that we work together to use the best thinking and insight of every one of us to drive this improvement. And together we can make this an improved organisation and maintain its competitiveness into the future.